Hello there, Christopher here. A quick special request before we dive into this episode. We've been producing the Musicality podcast for about 6 months now, and I really want to know what have been your favourite episodes. If you've been listening since the beginning, then a big thank you to you, and you'll know that we've had a real variety of guests on the show, and topics too. To help us make sure that the show is as useful and enjoyable as possible for you in future, I want to hear from you, our listeners, about what's been the best so far. To share your favourite, what I'd like you to do is please post a review of the podcast. You'll find easy instructions at musicalitypodcast.com/review. And I'd love for you to write anything you like about the show in general, and then pick out one favourite episode and share what made that one top of the list for you. A big thank you in advance for taking just a few minutes to do this, especially if you don't think of yourself as someone who normally writes reviews or posts things online. It means a huge amount to us here on the team when we see a new review come in, and it really helps the show to reach more people like you. And of course, it'll help us plan better and better episodes for you in the future. Thanks again, and I look forward to hearing about your favourites so far.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Let's start with a question. What do you think of when you hear the word tone? Imagine you're talking with a musician friend and they use that word. What would you expect them to be talking about? In our recent episode with Donna Schwartz, we talked about tone. For example, her struggles to get a good tone on trumpet, or how she now helps saxophone players develop a good tone. From the context, I'm sure you understood what we were talking about, but that word tone can be tricky. In this episode, I'm going to share 6 different meanings the word tone can have in music, and there are probably even more. I'll do my best to be clear and specific, but please keep in mind that often the way musicians use this word is fuzzy. So if you've heard the word used for a blend of these things, or with a meaning that isn't quite what I'm describing, please know that this is not a precise thing with official definitions. In fact, that's the main reason I wanted to talk about it on today's episode, so that you're equipped with several clear, specific definitions of the word tone, and can use that to understand it whenever and wherever and however it's used. I've roughly grouped the 6 meanings into 2 categories. 3 are about tone as a sound itself, and 3 are about tone as a quality that a sound can have. When I started planning out this episode, it quickly got out of hand. There is a lot to cover, so we're going to discuss the first 3 now, and then the other 3 in a future Part 2 episode with a recap. So let's get started. First of all, tone can mean a note. Perhaps the simplest of meanings, many musicians use the word tone interchangeably with the word note. For example, they might say, "I'm learning to play tones by ear," or "I understand the rhythm, but I'm struggling to figure out what tones are being used in the melody of that song," or "Bar 13 is tricky, sometimes I play the wrong tones there." In fact, we've used the word like that here on the podcast when talking about the concept of chord tones, which just means the notes belonging to a chord. Personally, I don't love this use of the word. Some people use it just to mean the pitch of a note, and others to mean the note as a whole. I think it's clearer to use the word note to mean a musical sound with both pitch and duration, and possibly other characteristics, and if you just mean pitch, use the word pitch. It's not a big deal, but as we'll be discussing, there are several other more specific meanings of the word tone, so I find it tends to confuse people when it's used in just this very broad and general way to essentially just mean a note. So the second meaning is that tone can mean a single pure frequency. This is the one typically used in a scientific context, like when analyzing audio files, or by studio engineers who think in terms of frequencies. For example, they might say, "Can you play a 500 Hz tone so that I can test this speaker?" Or, "We're getting a sustained high-pitched tone on this recording. There must be interference leaking in somewhere." Or, "We can test the resonance by comparing the volume of a 1 kHz tone and a 2 kHz tone." In those cases, tone means an audio wave which has a single frequency component. We won't go deep into audio frequencies right now, but just to quickly give you the idea, Pitch and frequency are similar. They both measure how high or low a sound is. But musical notes from an instrument or our singing voice have a single pitch, but they have tons of different frequencies present, and that's a big part of what gives them such a rich and varied sound. When a sound only contains a single frequency, it's called a tone. For example, you might have heard of a sine wave, which just sounds like the simplest possible long beep sound. Here's an example. That is just a single frequency. It's the A440 Hz that orchestras tune up to. And that's what scientists and audio engineers would call a tone. It's a nice, clear definition. The third meaning is that tone can mean a particular interval in music. The word tone is one word used for a particular type of interval. So you might hear a musician saying, "I think the final interval in that tune is a tone, not a semitone." Or, "I've nailed major versus minor thirds, but sometimes I mix up minor thirds and tones." Or, "The major scale goes tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone." The word tone is used to refer to the interval of a major second, also known as a whole step. On a piano keyboard or a guitar fretboard, you go up 2 steps, because it uses 2 of the smallest building blocks we use, called semitones, or major seconds, or half steps. To hear a tone using this meaning means you're hearing 2 notes. These might be one after the other, or both played together. For example, here are several tones played one note after the other. And here are a few played both notes together. Okay, so those were our 3 examples of how a tone can mean a sound. It can be used very loosely to just mean a note. It can be used to mean a sound that's a single pure frequency. Or it can be used to mean a particular interval, 2 notes played either one after the other or together, also known as a whole step or a major second. The next 3 meanings are when a tone means a specific quality or aspect of a sound. We'll be covering that in a future Part 2 episode soon.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.